Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami, Tatyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Tatyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Tatyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami. So even as we settle, you'll notice that any habit of being the meditator, you'll notice that is the activity of selfing. It's not about judging it. And even being the one who's not meditating, that's also selfing. So instead, it can be this relaxing sense of humor. Oh, it's like this pickle, this conditioned mind, the mind that is conditioned to do and not do. So we're bringing a lot of open, non-judging space to the way it is here now in the body and in the mind. So in this way, practice is really about connecting or opening instead of more specific sense of doing or getting somewhere or making something happen. The emphasis initially is to stabilize present moment awareness, this simple stabilizing awareness that understands this experience is being known, being felt. And that's enough. That ongoing discernment that this experience is being known, being felt. And ideally with some momentum, some continuity of awareness, you'll notice the sense of ease, the ease of allowing the conditions of the moment to come and go without judging. Everything belongs. Every experience of the body and the mind has permission to be the way it is right now. Not presuming that things should be different than the way they are. This is a sense of ease, sense of easeful alignment with the way it is. Not being in conflict with the way that it is right now. And in a sense, this is our first responsibility as a meditator, because it really sets up a deeper kind of learning when we're able to stabilize, come to this place of not being in conflict with the conditions that are coming and going. It has the flavors of humility and simplicity and tranquility. And to help to support the stabilizing of present moment awareness, samadhi, it can be helpful if it's not forced. It can be helpful to train the mind to be interested in calm as you're breathing in, for example, and to be interested in calm in the body and the mind as you breathe out. So you're not trying to make something happen. You're just realizing that it's important what the mind pays attention to. I could be paying attention to what's agitating right now, or I could pay attention, highlight the sense of ease and calm as I breathe in and breathe out. I wonder what's more skillful. interesting thing, to whatever degree the mind is able to rest in this clear and stable present moment awareness, to trust it, then of course, because of habit, different patterns of selfing will arise. A little burst, expression of greed, a irritation, a hope, a fear. But with this backdrop of calm, it's easier to notice selfing. Just the activity, this arising activity of being as somebody doing something, as somebody wanting something, as somebody not wanting something, as somebody with an opinion, as somebody who's confused or has doubt. And the interesting thing, when selfing arises, you might notice another moment of selfing, being the one who wants to stop, or being the one who thinks they have to let go of that first selfing. So very quickly things can get complicated in the heart and mind. But wisdom is just more interested in understanding these patterns of selfing, of self-centeredness, the self-centered dramas, whatever it might be. It's not so much that the practitioner has to abandon the habit of selfing, as much as it is that wisdom sees that selfing is just something being known, seeing selfing for what it is. It's something that arises and ceases on its own. So again, we're emphasizing the calm, the stability of mind, and learning to trust and rest in the stability of that present moment awareness with the body, with the breath, whatever. And then being curious about the arising and passing of the dramas. And noticing how selfing ceases without you or anybody needing to get in there and get rid of it. Over and over again, every self-centered drama, its very nature is to arise and then to cease. And this is a very natural and impersonal process. And the more the mind understands this, the more there's real freedom. Freedom from having to fix the problem of selfing. It's all about understanding, not about somebody fixing something. So let's continue in silence now for a while. course, it's the deep habit of the mind to frame experience in terms of self-centeredness, even if it's quite subtle. So as needed, you can drop the question in the mind, what is the mind taking the self to be? What is the mind taking the self to be now? That just encourages wisdom to recognize this pattern of selfing as something being known and observe how it comes into being and then it ceases, and then the next thing arises and it ceases. And if nothing else, you can notice many different ways the sense of being the practitioner, being the meditator, will just naturally arise. And just notice that arising as something being known or felt. It's there, and then it ceases. So we're learning not to be afraid of these entangling habits of selfing, becoming somebody, trying to fix something, trying to get somewhere. But notice them arising in contrast to the background of relative calm and ease. Recognize these dramas as something being felt, being known. Oh, this is what the mind is taking the self to be now. Oh, notice how it naturally ceases. You don't have to, nobody has to do anything. So the skill is to be able to bring the mental activity of selfing into the view of something being known. Doesn't matter how toxic or unhealthy that particular pattern might be, or how relatively wholesome it might be. Wisdom just wants to see and feel things as they are. So instead of realizing the mind with no selfing going on, maybe more accurate to describe the freedom the Buddha points to as realizing the mind that's not confused by these different activities of selfing. And take a couple moments to move the body a little if you like. Colleen, would you turn the top two lights up a little bit more? Thanks. Yeah, that looks good. Well, welcome everyone. Probably know tonight is the week 8, the last week for our Buddhist studies class on Anatta, the Buddha's teachings on not self. And maybe we'll just do a brief check-in about the meditation, because it really goes to the heart of what we've been learning these last weeks. It would be so easy and tragic, right, to have studied what we've studied only to be left with another self-project, which like I'm going to realize not self, or I'm going to once and for all put down, get rid of these self-centered activities. And it's very common. I mean, it's maybe unavoidable that would be our perspective, because the habit is systemic, where whatever, doesn't matter what the instructions or even how clear the instructions, how nuanced they are, the systemic habit is to frame things as a self-problem. Everything is a self-problem. So when we're meditating, that's one of the reasons there's so much emphasis on tranquility, because selfing is always stressful. Framing things from a point of view of me, I, me, or mine always has the flavor of stress or dukkha. So if we cultivate the calm of present moment awareness, the continuity of present moment awareness, that non-judging, this baseline, to whatever degree we have some momentum with samadhi, there's a baseline of stability and calm, then that particular habit energy of the mind to worry about something that happened earlier, to imagine something that might happen tomorrow and we're excited about or we're nervous about, or there's any number of patterns that are going to show up in a half an hour sit, right? And now they're showing up against the background of calm. So it's relatively easy then for the mind to take the role of being the one who's interested in that little display of selfing, that little activity of worrying or planning or hoping, or even being the meditator, being the practitioner who wants to be calm or thinks I need to, or I'm finally getting it. So there's any number of ways for self-centered activity to blossom there. And then the idea isn't to, okay, I saw my enemy, I see the enemy, let me get to work. But it's more wanting to be curious and see that selfing isn't the problem. Misunderstanding selfing is the problem. So these ordinary self-centered, what we would call ordinary thinking, self-centered thinking, worrying, planning, hoping, comparing, internal gossiping about people, complaining mind, right? The problem is the mind or wisdom misunderstanding what that is. And the resolution of that problem is to see that that self-centered activity is empty of self. It's just what it is being known. It doesn't refer back. So that's the resolution, is a shift in understanding. It's not a clever psychological move where we learn how to, because we do that sometimes, like in the stabilizing of present moment awareness, as a, just to say it in this kind of language, as an ego, I might get in there and say, oh no, I'm worrying, I'm going to do this Dharma move to push the worry out of the mind, and I'll bring loving kindness into the mind. Or I'll bring my meditation object in, like that image the Buddha used as using a peg, a wooden peg, to pound out the old rotten peg. Right? So I'm going to bring my attention to the breath, and with real integrity, bringing my attention to the breath, I'm making myself not pay attention to this thought about worrying what's going to happen tomorrow, or whatever. So there is a lot of this warring, you know, skillfully, sometimes with a subtle nuance, and sometimes like we're just getting in and we're wrestling with the mental tendencies so as not to be swept away by unhelpful tendencies, right? So we sort of meet the mind where it's at, and if it's a real beast, then we have to sometimes get in there. No, I'm not going to think about this. And sometimes the mind is less beastly, and it can just be gently encouraged to be present, to stabilize awareness. But then once we get somewhat settled, then we don't want to keep practicing from this self-centered point of view. I'm somebody with a conditioned mind that's all over the place, and I want to be settled. That's how we usually start a sit, and even the first 10, 20 lifetimes of our practice, right? Where we, it feels like a self-centered project a lot of the time. I have this mind, it's like this today, what can I do to tame it? What can I do to help it settle down? What can I possibly do to have that inner good feeling I sometimes get in a set? Because that's what I want. Right? So it's very self-centered. And then it's only when there's some degree of stability, calm, that the anatta, because it's such a subtle thing, the peace, right, the mind, the one who knows, awareness, sensing everything as a movement of nature. And so with that, with tranquility has some wisdom to it. Right? Because tranquility is that easeful sense like stuff's just happening on its own, pretty content. I'm not being pushed around by somebody's likes and dislikes, right? That's the ego, that's the self-centeredness, being pushed around by my likes and dislikes. But when I'm feeling good, a lot of that egoic activity of being chased by or pushed around by likes and dislikes, it kind of recedes because I'm feeling good. I'm feeling tranquil and calm. So then still self-centered activity will burst into the scene because it's got momentum, and there will be triggers. You'll hear somebody rustling or a memory will come up, and then in a moment there will be a little self-centered drama. But against the background of calm, there's the possibility that wisdom recognizes that it's just something being felt, being known, something that has taken birth, and then it will cease. It will only cease if the mind lets it be what it is. If the mind misinterprets it as me or mine, that thought, that worry, that hope, then that misinterpretation fuels, right? It becomes a feedback loop. It's still coming and going, but it's replicating itself. So as it's ceasing, it's re-emerging. Because the mind, the way the mind is relating or attending to it is from this frame of self. Conceit, I, me, or mine. So, with that in mind, it might be nice for a few people just to share, like in the meditation tonight and then previously at home, just that observing of selfing, observing the ordinary dramas that come and go in our mind, right? And just any thoughts you have, and you can do this is the sort of setup for the small group discussions too, but just noticing conceit, any sense of me as better than, worse than, same as, any conception of self, but seeing it as a present moment phenomena. And when seen from that not self point of view, then the selfing activity is understood as just nature, empty of self. Not a problem, right? Because it's when the self thinks that selfing is a problem, you see the entanglement. Oh, I have to make this mind different. And you see how this, even in this very subtle way of working with our own mind, it's teaching us how to work with the complexity and messiness of the whole world, of our relationships, right? So is the way that we deal with the heaviness in my heart, I've got to fix the world? Or do I have to transform how I relate, how I understand my relationships and what's happening in the world? And the image in the tradition, some of you have heard, is just like if we're constantly getting poked by the sharp things we're stepping on, we might have the brilliant idea, I'm going to cover the entire earth in shag carpet. Then I'll no longer step on sharp objects. Or we can build a pair of shoes. And this is the pointing to wisdom. It's like instead of me constantly thinking, if only I can manage the world, organize the world so it doesn't bother me, then I'll be happy. And we go to work. Getting our house together, getting our partner together, getting rid of our partner, finding a different partner, making our kids the way we think they should be, making the world the way we think it should be, pretending the world is the way we want it to be, not looking over there, not looking over there because we don't want to be disturbed, hiding in our little communities so that we can pretend that it is the way that I want it to be. That's endlessly stressful. Or we can learn to open and embrace the messiness and the imperfection and the suffering in and around us and see it and feel it for what it is, like outright exposure. Because outright exposure to life, engagement, exposure to life, you see, that's not a problem unless there's a somebody who wants permanent safety. But for nature, nature's not afraid of viruses. I mean, it will be really interesting in these months ahead, assuming that, the virus spreads, to kind of take care of business, not to be averse to doing what's good to do, like training ourselves not to touch our face and waving instead of shaking hands and giving people hugs and, thinking about surfaces and who has touched that surface in the last week. And maybe I shouldn't touch that surface, or maybe there's a particular way I should make contact with that surface. Without being the heart unnecessarily being confused with the stories that the mind can tell. Because the mind is part of the mind is a storytelling mind. It's just going to keep telling stories. And like one of the, there I go. One of the stories the mind tells, I'm not sure that's the right thing to do, by the way. See, this is where practice comes in, where you can have an itch, and you have the option of just feeling the itch without actually having to scratch the itch. This is something we learn in the first 10 lifetimes of our practice. How to feel an itch without actually having to touch it. Yeah. Anyway, let's just take a couple comments, and then I'll have a few more things to say before we split into small groups. So just comments about the sit tonight or earlier, seeing selfing, and it could be just even in the middle of the day, not in a formal sit, where you saw selfing as just a present moment phenomena, something being known, and then what did the mind realize when you saw it, that mental activity in that way? Any thoughts about that come to mind? Yeah, Judy, you want to start us off? Or just maybe do two people all the way in the back there.
Well, I kind of have a question, because I noticed this. I was with a group of people this weekend, and was just noticing this come up a lot, especially because we're studying this. just noticing various times when I would see the ego arising and, in the way of judgment, better than, or if I was feeling a little insecure, the ego was screaming, oh, I'm not good enough, or, just feeling a little fear and all that kind of thing. And in the past, you or others have talked about when that the simple act of noticing and awareness of that, like that just helps somehow. I don't quite understand, but over time things will dissipate just because of awareness. So I guess I was wondering, as this was happening and I was noticing it, is that true for what I'm describing as what was happening to me this weekend?
Yeah, and we can confirm that. I mean, actually, we should be asking you that question. Was it true that when you looked at it, even if the looking might have been a little contaminated with self, like this is unpleasant, so partly I'm looking at this as a natural arising, and partly I'm looking at it as something that's painful, the selfing, and I want it to go away. But to whatever degree the mind was looking at it with more of a wholesome curiosity, not an agenda, then the question to you would be, did the tension of that selfing dissipate when the mind saw it as a natural phenomena, something that comes and goes and is not self?
Well, I think what I was aware of was just I was aware of the tension, you know, and a little bit of fear, like, is being aware of this good enough? So the self is like still on a project here to get rid of it,
Right,
And
right.
anyway, I don't know that I've
Yeah, and so a
gone the
lot
next
of
step, but
yeah, a lot of the nimbleness is for wisdom to quickly take another step back and recognize the doubt, which would be
yes,
the next arising, the next selfing. Oh, this is now what the mind is taking the self to be, the one who's in doubt about whether I know what I'm doing, or whether this is going to help, whatever the
yeah,
doubt might
yeah,
be.
yeah.
So that's the thing. And that's why that question. I recommend that you memorize that question. What is the mind? What is the mind taking the self to be now? What's the mind taking the self to be right now? And you can, this would be a good moment. What is right now the mind taking the self to be? And you might catch a whiff of, oh, I'm the person who's trying to understand this. Right? Or I'm the person who thinks I'm never going to get this. Or I'm the person, the self is the one that thinks this is just a bunch of hogwash. Or whatever. But that's just the next arising that is arising out of that very pervasive framing where the meaning-making mind, it's, a subtle part of thinking, is always constructing meaning from a particular point of view. But we correct that by cultivating mindful awareness. See, what really brings wisdom into mindful awareness is when there's enough continuity. This is why there's such a big emphasis and concentration, which isn't a great translation of the word samadhi in Buddhism, because mindfulness is going to be infused with our basic habits of conceit and self-centeredness, right? Okay. It's a good idea. I want to get good at it. But when there's enough continuity, there's a good feeling. It's just like it just naturally goes with the continuity of present moment awareness. The body, heart, and mind feels good. Because the mind, to be continuously aware of the present moment, the mind has to abandon so much neurotic activity that causes its ordinary tension. So when we do have enough continuity of present moment awareness, when we're actually being what we mean mindful, then it feels good. And then that inner good feeling diffuses a lot of egoic activity, because most egoic activity is about feeling good. So when I'm feeling good, what's the point of egoic activity? So a lot of it falls to the side when we feel some basic inner happiness, inner ease, inner calm and joy. Then now that hungry part of the mind's conditioning, the greed, anger, delusion part, is relatively quiet. So then there's some basic wisdom like, oh, this is the mind without a lot of hunger, without a lot of craving. Mm-hmm. This is the mind without a lot of craving going on. And so then the reason I say there's some wisdom there is because all of a sudden that mind can start to recognize craving, doing, with an agenda, as something being known. Because it has that contrast of feeling relatively chilled out, relatively at ease. So when the mind, the egoic mind, the greedy, angry mind or whatever, springs into action and we're chewing on some memory or fantasizing about something that we're really excited about, it just stands out in contrast to the heart that's at ease with non-craving. Then when craving arises, it's easier to see it take birth in the mind as a phenomena being known and see it cease when the mind doesn't take the bait, right? Take it as I, me, or mine. Oh no, that's just a thought. That's just a little drama being known. Oh yeah. So the key is that often we'll start to see these patterns, but we're still in that controlling mode because we're not feeling good. Mm-hmm. And so when we're not feeling good, the question is how to find some ease. You know, we have the different reflections that bring loving kindness in. This is why it's really worth developing that particular muscle of connecting and sustaining. Because when I can sustain present moment awareness with some neutral meditation object, I can't be neurotic. I'm too busy connecting and sustaining awareness with the breath, or with the sensations of the body sitting, or the experience of hearing. But it's really hard to generate the intention to do something like that because the ego doesn't understand what the purpose is. The ego is kind of going, or the self-centered tendency, why are you trying to squeeze me out of the scene? You know, you're trying to do something, and when you're doing that, the overlord can't be here. Right? See, and that's the whole point mm-hmm. of developing that continuity of present moment awareness, is it really cleans the mind out, because the mind is full of connecting to an object. And sometimes we use different objects, not the same object over and over again, right? What we call open attention practice. And sometimes we're working with just a particular meditation object, like bringing the attention to the rising and falling of the abdomen, or touching as the air goes in and out, or some aspect of present moment experience. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Trudy. Any other experience from sitting that makes sense to bring up? Yeah, Rafi. And then I'll say a few more words to set up the small group discussions.
Yeah. I have a mundane, I think, mundane, ordinary example, I think, of what you're talking about. I swim. I like swimming, and I find out that swimming and meditation is a good mix, because you are focused on your breath, mm-hmm. constantly. But just this last week, I was swimming, all so nice, and then suddenly this other person came to the next lane, and she was much faster and better than me. And so I catch myself thinking, wow, I suck at this. I'm not good. She's faster. She's better. And then your words came to me. It's all nature. It's all causes and conditions. And I was like, it has nothing to do with me. If this person wouldn't have gotten today here, I would not be thinking or having that thought. It's all It's nothing
Yeah.
to do with me. I was selfing and comparing. And so, the question you asked her before, for me was like, gone. The moment I realized that I didn't need to compare and nothing to do with me, it was all causes and conditions, the whole stress
Yeah.
disappear.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, if I see another person in the other line shorter than me, slower than me, then I feel like, hey. And then I catch myself again thinking, here goes the ego, now thinking I'm so fast and so good. But I've been swimming for years, and now that I come to realize all these things going on in the swimming pool in my mind.
Yeah, everywhere, everywhere, right? In traffic, at the grocery store. Conceit is endemic in the mind. And I don't think it's going to go away. It's the misunderstanding. And that's what got corrected in that moment, right? It's totally because of the way our minds are conditioned. When somebody comes close to us, you know, we're going to have opinions, whether it's swimming in the pool or anywhere else. The mind is going to have opinions, and sometimes the mind will feel threatened, and sometimes the mind will be attracted, and sometimes the mind is going to feel better than, and sometimes worse than, and sometimes the same. And the deal will be, as you described, Rafi, to understand that that judgment is just what it is. And you see how this is different than trying to become perfect, the person who doesn't have judgments or who doesn't have conceits, as opposed to this aspiration to be wise. The person who understands that conceit or judgments or any kind of expectation agenda, it's just that it's empty of self. It's something that arose in the mind because of causes and conditions, as Rafi said, and will cease like it happened. It just, the issue ceased because the mind didn't misunderstand it. It knew what that whole little bubble that arose in your mind was, that drama. It was empty of self. It was causes and conditions. Not me, not mine, right? Not I. It was just that natural phenomena. And it's such a relief. This is what really brings in the sense of freedom. It's such a relief not to have to be perfect. The practice is realizing the way that it is and the way that it has been and the way that it always will be. So we don't have to become special or different to be free. We just need to understand what this is right now, what it's always been. The drama of my life, what has it been? Like all those stupid things I've done, those embarrassing things that I would never want to tell you, right? It's like all of that is empty of self. And all the good stuff we've done, the stuff we're proud of, the stuff I'd like you to know about me, empty of self. And it's just so liberating to not have to be tied to that part of the mind, that sort of ordinary, unavoidable part of the mind. It's just part of that animal conditioning of hierarchy, like am I here or here, equal, better, worse. That part is going to happen. And in a way, it's a little idealistic as primates to somehow think that we're going to create a culture or society that doesn't have hierarchy of some kind. I'm not saying it can't get better or less toxic. I think it can. But it's always going to have these sort of constructs, but we don't have to be confused by them. And so if we run into somebody who's got really difficult conditions, or if we run into one of the beautiful people who happen to be really wise and kind and physically beautiful, and every good thing has happened to them, but we're not confused by whatever kind of response we feel or sense in our heart. Oh, jealousy. How interesting. Pity. Oh, look at that. It's just pity being known. So in the small groups, I don't know how many of you had a chance to take a look at Christina Feldman's article. I thought it was sort of nice, The Long Journey to a Bow. And I think that's such a useful image because, it's not so much in our culture, especially these full bows. There's a Westerner, I don't know if anybody knows about Reverend Hung Shur. He is just an American guy, but living in the Bay Area, I think. But he ran into a Chinese Mahayana Buddhist teacher back a while back, and found his way into Buddhist practice and ordained. So he's a bhikkhu, a Buddhist monk in the Mahayana tradition. And for 6 years, he took on the training of not speaking. And for the first 2.5 years of that, he walked from their center in LA to they have a monastery called the City of 10,000 Buddhas. It's actually the group that donated the land for Abhayagiri, which is in our tradition. Both are a little bit outside of Ukiah in Northern California. So I don't know how many hundreds of miles that is, because Ukiah it's like 2-3 hours north of San Francisco. So from LA to 2 or 3 hours north of San Francisco. Every 3 steps, full bow. That's why it took 2.5 years. And so now, that would bring up, can imagine how embarrassing that is, as people drive by and harass you or wonder, and you're in your robes and, shaved heads and doing this weird thing. Just that. I mean, you can imagine how many moments of feeling so superior, like, you idiots, you don't realize what I'm doing, and how many times doubt would have risen, like, what am I doing? This is so weird, And so one of the things I thought might be useful in the small groups is to think about places in your life where there has been a very clear, strong sense of conceit, being better than, being the same as, or being worse than, less than. And the important thing is a real certainty. Yeah, we're the same. We're the same. And the mind is sort of projecting that identity. No, we're the same. We're all the same here. Or no, I'm better than you. Look I'm sitting higher or something. Whatever it is. I've got my Boy Scout badge on or something that makes us different, I'm a teacher, you're a student, or, I'm the parent here, you're my kid. And just seeing that construct of being better than as just that, a construct that the mind has constructed and is clinging to with identification. And the same thing with places in your life worse than. And you might find that even you may not have that much space of wisdom in the places you're going to bring up during your 3-minute sharing, but just talking about that place where you feel less than or you feel more than, that's sort of a risky thing to do. Hopefully there's enough safety in the small groups to just own that there are places in my life where I feel better than, and there are places in my life where I feel less than. And there are these places in my life where I'm deludedly identified with being the same as. And then you might just save a little time, a few seconds at the end, take one of those places that feels especially poignant, and just imagine the mind not clinging to that identity of being the same as or better than or worse than. It just, oh yeah, always when I'm with my parent, my mom, let's say, I feel less than, And just to, what would it be like that for that pattern to be there, but the mind not to be confused by that pattern of being less than or better than or whatever? Does that give everyone enough to go on for the small groups? So we have plenty of time tonight. So at least 3 minutes per person, and then time just to continue the discussion in your small group for about 5 minutes or so after everyone has had a chance to share. And it looks like maybe a little bit more than 60 people. So why don't we do 20 and see where we are? 1? And then a couple people are still sitting. You want to go here? 12? Go ahead. Hey, how about that? Doesn't happen very often. Okay, so you're one. So we'll have one in Shelley in my office, and two in the outer office, Gabe's office. 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 in the community room. 8 and 9 in the lobby. 10 on the white couch below. 11 in the library area right next to the white couch. 12 and 13 in the workshop, which is the other room in the basement. 14 in that corner, 15, 16 against the wall, 17 here, 18, 19 by the light switches, and 20 over against the wall. Have a great small groups, everyone.